Her hearing aids were still in the house. Her evening heart medication was still on the kitchen counter, untouched. She did not pack a bag. She did not leave a note. She did not take the one device that tells her heart how to beat correctly. When an 84-year-old woman who depends on daily medication to stay alive leaves her home in the middle of the night without any of those things, there are only two explanations. She left in a state of terror, so sudden and so total that she had no time to reach for anything. Or the person who took her knew she would not need them. Both of those explanations are cold. Only one of them is colder. Think about what it means to leave behind a hearing aid. For an 84-year-old woman living alone, that device is not optional equipment. It is the difference between hearing a sound in the dark and not hearing it. Between being able to understand what someone is saying to you and not understanding it. Between being able to respond to the world around you and being entirely cut off from it. A woman who relies on that device does not leave it on a shelf by choice. She leaves it there because she had no choice at all. Or because the person who moved her through that house in the middle of the night did not need her to hear what was coming. The hearing aids and the medication were not forgotten. They were left. And the difference between those two words is the difference between a kidnapping and something far more calculated and far more cold. Stay with me through this entire video. Because I'm going to walk you through every piece of physical evidence in that house that tells the same story, what a former FBI special agent and CIA officer said about the level of plan this crime required, and why the person who took Nancy Guthrie knew things about her daily life that a stranger simply could not have known. By the end, the word planned will not be a theory. It will be the only conclusion the evidence supports. But to understand what those two objects left behind actually prove, you first need to understand the woman who owned them, the night she disappeared, and the specific sequence of events that no random crime of opportunity could have produced. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives in the Catalina foothills, a quiet semi-rural neighborhood just north of Tucson, Arizona, where the houses sit back from the road and the streets carry almost no traffic after dark. She has a heart condition. She takes medication every day to manage it, not as a precaution but as a medical necessity, the kind of daily pharmaceutical regimen that a body at 84 depends on the way a machine depends on fuel. She has a pacemaker embedded in her chest. She wears hearing aids. Her mobility is limited, but her mind, by every account and by the words of the sheriff of the county where she lives, is sharp. She is independent. She is the kind of woman who has a routine, a predictable, daily, knowable routine. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC, and of Annie Guthrie. On the evening of January 31st, a Saturday, she had dinner at Annie's home. At 9:48 inches the evening, Annie's husband Tommaso Cioni drove her home. He waited while she walked inside. He watched the garage door close behind her at 9:50 p.m., and then he left. The following morning, her family could not reach her. She failed to appear at a previously scheduled commitment. Deputies arrived at the house and found what no random opportunity crime leaves behind so cleanly. Blood on the front porch, confirmed as Nancy's. And inside the house, a still life of a life interrupted. Her evening medication on the kitchen counter. Her hearing aids on their shelf. No packed bag. No note. No sign that she had prepared to go anywhere. At 1:47 inches the morning, the Ring doorbell camera had been physically removed from its mount. Not unplugged, removed. At 2:28 inches the morning, the pacemaker embedded in Nancy Guthrie's chest stopped syncing with her iPhone. In the 41 minutes between those two timestamps, something happened inside that house that no camera recorded and no witness survived to describe. And the objects left behind are the closest thing to a record that remains. Every object left in that house is a data point, and when you read them together, they do not describe a crime that happened to Nancy Guthrie. They describe a crime that was built around her. Now let us read them, one by one, because each object left behind in that house carries information that a forensic laboratory cannot manufacture and that a defense attorney cannot explain away. They are the physical record of a decision made by someone who had already calculated what Nancy Guthrie would and would not need after they were done. The medication first. Nancy's evening heart medication, sitting untouched on the kitchen counter, means one of two things. Either she was taken before she had the opportunity to take it, which places the intrusion before her normal bedtime routine was complete. Or she took it earlier, and what remained was the following day's dose, left behind because no one would be there to take it. Either interpretation carries the same implication. The person who took her was not planning to keep her alive long enough for the medication to matter. In every legitimate kidnapping, the hostage's medical needs are leverage. A kidnapper who wants a ransom payment keeps the hostage alive, at minimum, long enough to negotiate. You do not leave behind the medication of an 4-year-old woman with a diagnosed heart condition if you intend to present her as a living person whose return has monetary value. You take it with you. You use it as proof that she is being cared for. You use it to demonstrate that the leverage you are holding is intact. The medication was left. It was not taken. It was not mentioned in the ransom notes as a bargaining point. It sat on a kitchen counter while 41 days passed without a single piece of proof that the woman who needed it was still alive. The hearing aids carry a different layer of information. A person who wears hearing aids does not leave them behind voluntarily under any circumstances that involve planning on their part. They are the last thing removed at night and the first thing reached for in the morning. Their absence from a person's body is not a choice. It is a condition imposed by speed or by force, or by a situation in which the person wearing them had no agency over what happened next. Nancy Guthrie's hearing aids were on their shelf when deputies arrived. She did not choose to leave them. She was moved through that house by someone who was moving faster than she could follow, or by someone who had already made a decision that made her ability to hear irrelevant to what came next. The camera at the front door was not simply disabled. It was physically removed from its mount. This distinction matters more than it might initially appear. Disabling a camera remotely, cutting power to it, jamming its signal. These are the methods of someone who is improvising, someone who sees a camera and reacts. Physically removing a camera from its mount is the method of someone who came prepared to do exactly that. Someone who knew the camera was there. Someone who knew where it was mounted, what kind of mount it used, how to approach it in the dark without triggering whatever motion sensors or alerts it was connected to. That knowledge does not come from a single observation made in passing. It comes from deliberate reconnaissance conducted before the night of January 31st. And then there is the neighbor's camera. The ring system at the property adjacent to Nancy's did not fail entirely. It failed on one side, specifically the side of the property facing Nancy's home. One angle. The one angle that would have captured anyone approaching her property from the street. That selective failure is not a coincidence, and it is not a technical malfunction. A technical malfunction fails randomly. What happened to that camera failed with geometry. Geometry that places the point of failure exactly where it needed to be placed to remove the last external witness to whatever happened at that house between 1:47 and 2:28 inches the morning. All of that, the medication, the hearing aids, the camera removal, the selective neighbor camera failure, required advanced knowledge. Knowledge of Nancy's routine, knowledge of the surveillance layout of her neighborhood, knowledge of which angle the neighbor's camera covered and which direction it needed to fail. This is not the knowledge of a stranger. This is the knowledge of someone who had already been there, already watched, already mapped the distance between what the cameras could see and what they could not. I want to hear from you right now, in the comments. Which detail do you think proves most clearly that this crime was planned in advance? The camera physically removed from its mount? The selective failure of only one angle of the neighbor's system? The medication left behind with no attempt to use it as proof of life? Because when you place all of them in the same frame, they have one author. Drop your answer below. This community has caught details in this case that mainstream coverage missed entirely. But the question of who had this level of prior knowledge is not a theoretical one. It has a shape. And that shape runs through the social architecture of this family in a direction that the physical evidence in Nancy's house points toward, with a precision that no random perpetrator could have produced. Tracy Walder spent years as an FBI special agent and as a CIA officer. She is trained to read the difference between a crime that happened and a crime that was constructed. She looked at the evidence in this case and said something that carries the full weight of her career. She said the crime was just too targeted. Someone who knew this neighborhood, someone who had surveilled that specific house, someone connected through obsession or retaliation to Savannah Guthrie specifically, not to Nancy, to Savannah, which means the motive did not begin with an 4-year-old woman living alone in a quiet part of Tucson. It began somewhere in the world that connects to Savannah's public life or private circle, and it traveled inward toward Nancy along a path of prior knowledge that required access to the family. Surveillance of the kind this crime required is not accomplished in a single visit. To know where the doorbell camera was mounted, you need to have been close enough to observe it. To know which side of the neighbor's system faced Nancy's property, you need to have mapped the neighborhood from multiple angles. To know Nancy's evening routine well enough to plan an intrusion timed to the specific window when she would be inside and the street would be empty, you need to have watched her come and go. More than once, possibly many times. Who moves through the Catalina foothills without attracting attention? Someone with a reason to be there. Someone whose presence near the house would not strike a neighbor as unusual. Someone who has a social or familial connection to the people who live in that neighborhood that makes their presence, their car, their face, unremarkable. A stranger conducting surveillance of a residential property in a quiet neighborhood generates the kind of low-level awareness that neighbors carry without articulating. Someone who belongs there does not. Dominic Evans has been part of Tommaso Cioni's social world for 19 years. He is not a peripheral acquaintance. He is a fixture, the kind of long-term presence that accumulates shared knowledge of the people and places that constitute a life lived in proximity. A man who has been inside Tommaso Cioni's life for nearly 2 decades knows who Tommaso's family is. He knows where Nancy Guthrie lives. He knows that Savannah Guthrie is the daughter. He knows the neighborhood because the neighborhood is part of the social geography of the people he has known for 19 years. And he has felony convictions for burglary and robbery. Not misdemeanors, not impulsive crimes. Felonies that reflect a practiced ability to read a residential property, to identify its vulnerabilities, to plan an entry and execute it without the kind of noise that draws immediate response. A man with that criminal history and that social proximity does not look at Nancy Guthrie's house the way a stranger looks at it. He looks at it the way a professional reads a problem. He sees the camera. He sees the angles. He maps the neighbor's system without appearing to look at it at all. And he knows, because he has known Tommaso Cioni for 19 years, and Tommaso drove Nancy home countless times, exactly where the garage is, exactly how the driveway approaches the house, exactly what the street looks like at 1:47 inches the morning when there is no traffic and no light, and no one awake to see anything. The FBI visited the restaurant where Savannah Guthrie filmed a Today Show segment with her mother. The Bureau does not send agents to locations without a reason. That visit connects the public profile of Savannah Guthrie to a specific location where Nancy was present, where the two of them were filmed together, where anyone watching that broadcast could have observed the relationship between the mother and the daughter and begun to calculate what that relationship was worth in the architecture of a crime built around proximity and prior knowledge. Prior knowledge of Nancy's medication routine is the piece of this that closes the circle most completely. You cannot know that an 4-year-old woman takes a specific heart medication at a specific time of evening by observing her from the street. You know it because someone told you, or because you were inside the household often enough to observe it directly, or because you were close enough to the person who knew it that the information transferred through the ordinary conversation of people who share their lives with each other. The medication was on the counter, the hearing aids were on the shelf, and someone who came to that house in the middle of the night did not take either one, because they already knew those objects had already served their purpose in the life of the woman they came for. The forensic pipeline in this investigation did not begin with the objects left behind in Nancy Guthrie's house, but it leads back to them. Every track running simultaneously inside the FBI's Tucson field office connects, at some point, to the physical record of what happened in that house between 9:50 p.m. and 2:28 inches the morning. And that physical record was shaped irrevocably by decisions made in the first 20 hours after deputies arrived at the scene. Annie Guthrie's blue Honda CR-V sat in a federal evidence bay for more than a month. Not because it was the vehicle Tommaso Cioni used to drive Nancy home. It was not. He drove his own car. Annie's car was the vehicle Nancy had ridden in earlier that evening, before Tommaso took over for the final leg. Federal agents held it for over 30 days, swabbing every surface, cataloging every fiber, pulling every electronic record the vehicle's onboard systems had generated. 2 retired FBI agents, speaking independently on separate national broadcasts, said the duration of that seizure defied every standard protocol they had encountered in their careers. A vehicle in a federal kidnapping investigation is processed and released or retained as a formal exhibit. It does not stay in an evidence bay for more than a month, unless the people working it keep finding reasons to keep working it. That car has been returned to Annie, which means the extraction is complete. The chain of custody is sealed. What was taken from it has moved into the broader forensic architecture as a closed exhibit, ready for a courtroom whenever that courtroom becomes necessary. The cell tower analysis running on a parallel track does not depend on what Nanos chose to do with the crime scene or where he chose to send the DNA. Cell towers logged every device that was powered on and within range of the Catalina Foothills neighborhood between the evening of January 31st and the early hours of February 1st. Those records carry timestamps. They are stored. They cannot be altered retroactively by anyone who carried a phone through that neighborhood 6 weeks ago and now wishes they had not. But here is the dimension of cell tower analysis that applies specifically to planned crimes: the reconnaissance trips. If someone visited the Catalina Foothills neighborhood in the days or weeks before February 1st to map the surveillance landscape, to observe Nancy's routine, to identify the angle of the neighbor's camera, that movement left a record. A device powered on within range of towers near that neighborhood on dates preceding the crime is a data point that investigators working a premeditation theory are specifically looking for. That record exists, and 6 weeks of investigation have been accumulating the context that makes it meaningful. The Walmart clothing trace is running independently of everything else. The suspect captured in surveillance footage near the abduction window was wearing specific items. Federal investigators trace those items to their retail source. They obtain purchase data. They are cross-referencing that data against the physical profile documented in the FBI's suspect description and against the geographic and purchasing behavior of people in the relevant social radius. A cash purchase still generates a registered transaction log and a store camera image. A digital payment generates a trail that reaches backward through time into an identity with a name and an address and a pattern of behavior that a federal subpoena can follow without interruption. Derek Kayla's arrest placed a phone inside the federal evidence system. That phone contains a contact network. Every number stored in it, every message sent and received across the relevant timeline, every call log entry connecting Kayla to the people around him, is now inside the hands of investigators who have been mapping the social architecture of this case for 6 weeks. The number he used to send the ransom text, Tommaso Sione's private cell number, and Annie's, is inside that phone alongside every other number that Kayla considered close enough to store. And every person in that network who exists at the intersection of the music world, the Sione household, and the timeline surrounding February 1st is now a name that can be placed inside the investigative architecture being built at the FBI's Tucson field office. The pacemaker data remains the thread the public record has not closed. The device embedded in Nancy Guthrie's chest logged her cardiac activity without interruption from the moment it was implanted. The manufacturer's server received those uploads independently of the iPhone it synced with. What the data shows in the 41 minutes between 1:47 and 2:28 inches the morning, exists on a server that survived the night intact, regardless of what happened to the phone. In 41 days of national reporting on this case, no press conference and no official statement has confirmed that this data has been retrieved and analyzed. The silence around a piece of evidence, this specific and this potentially decisive, is either the deliberate protection of material being reserved for prosecution, or the most consequential unanswered forensic question in this entire investigation. Every forensic thread leads back to the same conclusion the physical evidence reached in the first hours. This was not spontaneous. This was built. And the person who built it left traces that planned crimes always leave. Because no amount of preparation can anticipate every digital record that modern life creates in the course of ordinary movement through the world. Jennifer Coffendafer did not say the investigation was going well in the first week. She did not say it was going well in the second week, or the third, or the fourth. She said what she saw. When things were concerning, she named them as concerning. When delays were significant, she addressed them without softening the language. She tracked this case from day one, posting careful analysis on X, speaking to Newsweek, appearing across national broadcasts, and maintaining throughout all of it the posture of a person who has spent a career learning the difference between what sounds good and what is actually true. On March 10th, she wrote 3 words she had not written once in the 6 weeks preceding them: half glass full. She wrote them in the context of a question she was asking publicly about why Sheriff Nanos was declining offers of assistance from civilian search organizations, why EC Search was turned away, why the United Cajun Navy was turned away, And the answer she provided to her own question is the answer that changes the meaning of every other signal this investigation has emitted since it began. When law enforcement declines large-scale ground searches in an active missing persons case, it is not because they have given up. It is because the search phase is over. Because the investigation has already developed information about the victim's location or condition that makes sending hundreds of volunteers into a search grid operationally irrelevant to where the case is actually going. Half glass full. From a woman who spent her career inside the institution that is now running the parallel tracks, converging on this case. That is not sentiment, it is a reading. And the reading says the investigation has already moved past the point where finding Nancy Guthrie requires looking for her in the conventional sense. Sheriff Nanos appeared on the Today Show in early March and used a word that former FBI intelligence analyst Jennifer Dahlbler described to Newsweek as atypical. The word was definitely. Investigators are definitely closer. Law enforcement officials in active federal cases do not use that word carelessly. They hedge. They qualify. They say, "We believe we are making progress." When a lead investigative official uses definitely in a public statement about an open kidnapping case with federal involvement, it is a choice. And it is a choice made when the direction of the investigation is no longer uncertain enough to warrant a softer word. John Miller, who ran counterterrorism for the NYPD at the deputy commissioner level and served as assistant director of the FBI, said something about this case that connects directly to the physical evidence left behind in Nancy's house. He said the crime went wrong immediately, not gradually, not in the days that followed. On that porch, in those first moments of contact, something went wrong that could not be corrected. And what came after, the ransom notes, the demands, the silence, may have been constructed not to recover Nancy Guthrie, but to cover what had already been done to her. He called it re-engineering. The crime, he was suggesting, may have been rebuilt into the architecture of a kidnapping after something irrevocable happened before the sun came up on February 1st. If that reading is correct, then the hearing aids and the medication left behind are not just evidence of planning. They are evidence of a plan that went wrong in execution and then required a new plan to conceal the failure of the first one. The ransom notes become performance. The demands become theater. And the 41 days of silence about whether Nancy Guthrie is alive become the silence of people who already know the answer to that question and are hoping the investigation does not reach the same answer before they can position themselves outside its reach. Share this right now. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She needs her heart medication every single day she has been gone. The tip line is 1-800-CALLFBI. The reward is $1.2 million, anonymous and confidential. If you know anyone who had been near that neighborhood before February 1st, anyone whose knowledge of that house felt specific in a way that strangers do not have, anyone connected to the names in this case whose behavior changed after that night, share this. One call. That is all it takes. Now, the full shape of what the planning evidence points toward. Because prior knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's home, her routine, and the surveillance landscape of her neighborhood does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a social architecture. And that architecture has a center, and the center has a triangle, and the triangle has been visible in this investigation since its early weeks. Planned crime requires 4 things: knowledge of the target's routine, knowledge of the surveillance landscape around the target, the ability to approach without generating suspicion, and the criminal skill set to execute what the planning designed. Every one of those requirements points in the same direction when you map them against the names that have been circling this investigation from the beginning. Who knew Nancy's evening medication routine? Not a stranger. Someone inside the household, or close enough to the household to have absorbed that information through the ordinary proximity of people who share their lives with each other. Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy home. He had dinner with her. He knew her routines the way a son-in-law who has shared meals and evenings with his wife's mother for years knows them. His silence, 41 days of it, sits at the center of the knowledge question that the medication and the hearing aids raise. Who knew the surveillance landscape of that neighborhood well enough to remove one specific camera and disable one specific angle of one specific neighbor's system? Someone who had been there before. Someone whose presence in the Catalina foothills would not register as surveillance because they had a legitimate reason to be there. Someone who, over multiple visits conducted before February 1st, had mapped the geometry of what the cameras could see and what they could not. Dominic Evans has been inside Tommaso Cione's social world for 19 years. He has felony convictions for burglary and robbery. He has a professional familiarity with reading residential properties, identifying their vulnerabilities, and planning entries that avoid detection. His physical profile corresponds at every documented point to the FBI's publicly released suspect description. Tattoo on the right wrist, pinky ring over a glove, black mustache, distinctive eyebrows, build and height placing the subject in his 30s or 40s. He has not been publicly named as a suspect. He has not been publicly named as a person of interest. And the gap between his documented correspondence with the FBI's description and his complete absence from the official public record is a gap that the convergence of the forensic pipeline is specifically designed to close. Derek Kayla sits at the third point of the triangle. He had Tommaso Cione's private phone number. He used it to send a ransom text. He has been arrested. His phone is inside the federal evidence system, and the contact network that phone contains is now inside the hands of investigators who have been building this case across 6 parallel forensic tracks for 6 weeks. Consider the 2 scenarios the evidence produces. In the first, the planning went as designed. Nancy Guthrie was taken, held, and the ransom demands were genuine. In this scenario, the absence of proof of life across 41 days is explained by a kidnapper who made a strategic decision to withhold it. But real kidnappers do not withhold proof of life when they are genuinely trying to collect a ransom. Proof of life is the only leverage they possess. Without it, there is nothing to negotiate. There is only the appearance of negotiation. And the ransom notes in this case stopped communicating, like someone had reached a decision and simply stopped maintaining the appearance. In the second scenario, John Miller's re-engineering theory is correct. The crime went wrong immediately on that porch. The blood confirmed it. And what followed, the notes, the text to Tommaso's private phone, the silence, was constructed by people who needed the investigation to believe Nancy Guthrie was alive and being held somewhere when she was not. In this scenario, the hearing aids and the medication were left behind, not because the plan failed to account for them, but because the plan had already reached its conclusion before anyone had time to stage the scene more carefully. The pacemaker data from the 41 minutes between 1:47 and 2:28 inches the morning, may be the piece of evidence that decides which scenario is true. If that data shows a cardiac event consistent with physical trauma before the sync went silent, the kidnapping narrative collapses from the inside. And the prosecution that follows is not a kidnapping case. It is a homicide case wearing a kidnapping's clothes. The person who planned this crime believed the planning would protect them. It always feels that way at the beginning. Careful preparation creates a confidence that the evidence trail has been managed, that what was removed or disabled or left behind was done so deliberately and completely enough to survive investigation. But planned crimes leave more traces than impulsive ones, because planning requires movement and communication and purchase and reconnaissance, and all of those activities leave records in the digital infrastructure of modern life that no amount of careful preparation can fully anticipate or erase. The task force has not been stood down. 4 detectives and 1 sergeant are still working this case full-time out of the FBI's Tucson field office. The DNA is being processed. The cell tower data is being mapped, including the reconnaissance trips that preceded the crime. The clothing is being traced. The contact network from Kayla's phone is being worked. And the pacemaker data exists on a server that the manufacturer controls, and that federal investigators with a warrant can reach. Andrew Bringle said, "These cases are solved when one conspirator decides they want out. One person, one call. Kayla made his calculation. He is in custody. The people whose numbers are in his phone are making theirs right now." The weight of 6 weeks of FBI intensity, of a $1.2 million reward sitting uncollected, of 700 credible leads being worked simultaneously, does not get lighter. It gets heavier, and at some point, the heaviness reaches a threshold that silence cannot hold. Savannah and Annie and Cameron placed flowers outside their mother's home and wrote on a card that though they are surrounded by so much darkness, their love burns bright. They are still waiting. And the person who planned this crime, who knew about the medication and the hearing aids and the camera and the neighbor's system and the 41 minutes of darkness that followed, is still out there. But not for much longer. Her hearing aids are still in the house. Her medication is still on the counter. And the person who knew she would not need them is still out there. But not for much longer. If this breakdown gave you something the headlines did not, hit like right now. 1 second. It tells Murder Mystery File that going this deep into the physical evidence is worth producing and worth producing again. Subscribe and turn on every notification, because when the arrest happens in this case, when the silence that has surrounded it for 6 weeks finally ends, we will have the complete breakdown before anyone else. And if you want to understand who had the access, the knowledge, and the criminal skill set to plan a crime like this, specifically the 19-year connection between Dominic Evans and the son-in-law who drove Nancy home and has not spoken publicly since, that video is right here. The planning goes deeper than you think. I will see you there.